Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. Let's go ahead and we'll get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the meeting for the Manitou Springs City Council. It's a regular meeting for November 2nd, 2021. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Council members Judith Chandler.
Present.
John Shada. Julie Wolf. Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Steve Grimner. Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune.
Present.
And Mayor John Graham.
Present. Thank you. And the next item of business is the approval of the agenda. And I apologize some for the length of the agenda for tonight. We have a lot of work to do between now and the end of the year. So that said, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move that we approve the agenda as written. Second.
Motion is second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, next item, public comment on non-agenda items. This is the portion of the meeting when we entertain comments from the public on any item that is not on the agenda. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak? I see we have one.
Yes, Mayor, I did receive one, and that's from Ross Weigel.
Sir, if you'd like to come forward, you have 3 minutes. And if you would give us your full name and address. And we typically do not respond to comments made during public comment time, but we do have your contact information, so we can get back to you. Well, yes, please, and you'll need to get, the light will need to be green, and you'll need to get probably about 3 inches or so away from the microphone. You have to be real close to, particularly with a mask on. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So Ross Weigel at 2 Stover Lane here in Manitou Springs. Let me get my notes. So a lot of my talk's going to come from a Newsweek article that was released yesterday. And the topic of my question is, so I still haven't heard back why the mask mandate was put in place and what metric was being used to determine when the mask mandate will be lifted. So when I came in August, the mask mandate was put in place, and about 20 plus people came here and offered really good points as to why they protested the mask mandate. So my goal is just to read a little bit from this article. This article states that more scientific data is coming in that makes it clear that some of the protocols we've used in this pandemic have not been the best choices. So it talks about a couple of things we chose to do, and one of the things it talks about is natural immunity. More and more scientific data is coming out about the power of natural immunity. There was one study in Israel that showed that there is a 13 times stronger effect at resisting this disease when natural immunity is developed. It also talks about one of the goals of the measures we put in place for COVID is to protect the elderly. What we've found is that the lockdowns have really not been able to do that. There's not much that stops the spread of this disease. Vaccines should focus on the 60 plus or those with comorbidities. And so why are we punishing a very low death rate group like 0 to 17-year-olds? I know the mask mandate affects Manitou and Manitou Elementary School, where I have 3 children. So I'm going to read a little bit from this article about school closures as well. Schools are major transmission points for influenza, but not for COVID. While children do get infected, their risk of COVID death is minuscule, lower than the already low risk of dying from the flu. Throughout the 2020 spring wave, Sweden kept daycare and schools open for all its 1.8 million children ages 1 to 15 with no masks, testing, or social distancing. The result? 0 COVID deaths among children and a COVID risk to teachers lower than the average of other professions. In fall of 2020, most European countries followed suit with similar results, considering the devastating effects of school closures on children. Dr. Fauci's advocacy for school closures may be the single biggest mistake of his career. And lastly, this article goes into the effectiveness of masks. There's been many studies on the effectiveness of masks. A study out of Denmark showed 0 effectiveness of masks, and a study out of Bangladesh showed a 0 to 18% effectiveness of masks. So at the best, masks are 0 to 18% effective at keeping the spread of this disease. So again, I ask, what was the metric used to determine this mask mandate, and what metric or data point is going to be used to decide when this mask mandate will be done? If we don't know these things, then what's the next mandate that's going to be put in place when we, the public, don't know why that was put in place? Are we going to require vaccines for the 0 to 17-year-old group of people who have less than 0.01% chance of dying from COVID, knowing that natural immunity is a lot more effective than these vaccines? So I will send an email with this article, and you guys can read that, and I would welcome any calls or emails with any questions for me as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Okay, if not, let's push on. So we have one item on the consent calendar tonight. That's approval of the October 19, 2021 regular meeting minutes. Do we have a motion? Mayor Pro Tem?
I would like to make one amendment to those minutes, and that specifically was in paragraph D, where it mentioned that the Mayor Graham explained the need to pull agenda item H6 HAB ordinance from the agenda as it was not ready. It was in fact ready. It was just there was no staff member here to present it.
Okay, thanks. So in effect, it is removed from the consent calendar and is treated as a separate item.
And I would move to approve with that change.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Johnson. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. On to business. Item G1, review of Planning Commission recommendation on RE 2105, rezone hillside low-density residential or park zone, 0 Topeka Avenue, City of Manitou Springs applicant, and first reading of ordinance 1421, rezoning this property. Michelle?
This rezoning application was reviewed at the October 13th Planning Commission meeting. It is for a parcel that is co-owned by the city and Save the Flats up off of Higginbotham Road, which is near the self-storage facility up there. It was purchased at the time that it was obtained for either park or open space purposes. And the city is wanting to proceed with park planning up there. And is going about, will be replatting the property. Also, this property specifically is used during emergency or disaster events for a helipad, and that use will remain up there and be incorporated into the park planning for the use of this property. And we have another property that's owned jointly with Save the Flats up there as well, that's across Topeka. So Planning Commission recommends approval unanimously, and as you know, as it was requested, and the recommendation tonight is approval of the rezoning and first reading of the rezoning ordinance that you have in front of you, and I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you. Council, questions for Michelle? Apparently we have no questions. Sound like maybe we're ready for a motion. Mayor Pro Tem?
Sure. I move to approve at first reading ordinance number 1421, an ordinance amending the zoning code of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado to rezone the property known as 0 Topeka Avenue under the El Paso County Assessor's Tax Parcel number 74052033075 from hillside low-density residential to park zoning district, and set a public hearing for November 16th, 2021 at 6 p.m. or soon thereafter as the matter may be heard.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Item G2, Manitou Springs Carnegie Library Resolution Number 1721, a resolution to approve the design of the historical Carnegie Library Building, expansion located at 701 Manitou Avenue, Manitou Springs, Colorado. And I believe we're going to be, Mary Pulvermacher, I believe, is our principal presenter tonight. Three of us, okay? All right, if you would all give us your name and address and title.
All right, my name is Mary Pulvermacher. I live at 20 Craig Lane in Manitou Springs. And, sorry,
Yeah,
is this better?
you need to be really close to about
right.
3 inches or so on these.
I'm moving in. All right, my name's Mary Pulvermacher, and I live at 20 Craig Lane in Manitou Springs. And what was the third thing?
Your title or just
Oh, I'm here representing the Preserve and Renew our Carnegie Library Task Force. So,
I'm Eric Rebel-Eunice with Ratio Architects at 1655 South Grant Street in Denver.
Michael Doherty, I'm the Director of the West Region for the Pikes Peak Library District, 20 North Cascade, Colorado Springs.
so I'm here to introduce the topic for tonight. If we can go to the next page in the, are you driving? Good. So the topic for tonight is to the review and adoption of resolution, I think it's 1521, I think that's a typo, and I apologize for that, to approve the design of the historic Carnegie Library building. And I'm thrilled and honored to be here tonight to introduce this topic and introduce Eric, who really needs no introduction. But we're very excited about the new design with the functional, it's accessible, beautiful design, which does many things. First, it rehabilitates our historic building to make it usable as a 21st century library, keeps the beautiful building at the entrance of our city, sitting at the top of the park as a prominent presence there in the park. It also allows the building to be accessible to everyone, which has never happened before in the history of this building, and also provides a newly accessible park space. So the ADA piece is for accessibility into and inside the building, but the rooftop garden also provides accessible park space in a park where the sidewalks, et cetera, are very steep. And so this will allow everyone to use that space and attend events in the park, which, as we know, there are many of those. And so this provides a place where books, ideas, culture can be shared, and in my opinion, this new design helps us create community. So there's many benefits to preserving our Carnegie Library, and this goes on to a few more of those. As we mentioned, it preserves this historic icon, which has been in operation since 1911. And although Andrew Carnegie provided funds to build it, it's been the citizens of Manitou who have sustained the library through the years. But that building can't be used right now. It was assessed in February of this year with the condition of poor and does not meet legal and code requirements. So something has to be done before that building can be used. And our great hope is that the design you see tonight will be what is done with that building. Another benefit we've already mentioned is that all the citizens will have access to the building. Our library is only one of 18 continuous use Carnegie libraries in the state, and we'd love it to stay that way, to continue to be one of the continuous use libraries. Pikes Peak Library District has committed that they would use this building once it's available and meets their needs. And as we know, they provide the programming, the staffing, and all the resources that are needed to do that. Also mentioned again, I sort of foot stomp the fact that there's newly accessible outdoor space that provides access for everybody for outdoor activities. And then, you know, also just as a sort of an aside, it also allows us to keep generating income as rent from the Pikes Peak Library District.
I really can't tell half of what, or about a quarter of what you're saying. So if you would just move that machine about 4 or 6 inches closer to the edge of the table, I think it would be
All right.
better. Thanks.
Sorry. This is this feels like, and I'm here to accept the, sorry. So the community-centric design, I want to talk a little about that. Is this better, Councilor Wolf? So Ratio Architects used a community-centric design process to come up with the design you're going to see tonight and to rehabilitate this building. And I think this is an exemplar for Manitou Springs on how to do community engagement and the community engagement process. We have, the task force has done extensive outreach. There's community forums with each of the wards in the area around the library, outreach to stakeholders like the chamber, the District 14, some of the community groups. Both the city and Pikes Peak Library District have facilitated the outreach to the community. Ratio Architects have done 2 rounds of community outreach, which started with engagement to the community and the citizens to provide feedback about the design, and then followed up with presentations to HPC and PARAB, and then to City Council. And we're at the end of the second round of that feedback now, which is bringing the second round to City Council for approval. And I think that my personal opinion is that Ratio has done a stellar job of responding to the comments. So they've created a design that meets the needs of the Pikes Peak Library District, but also responded to many, many comments and much input from the community on desires, goals, suggested changes, et cetera. And so I think the process that's been used to get us to tonight is an example of how community engagement really can work. So next. So I put in 2 charts on the history of the expansion, and I don't plan to go through those. Those are really mostly included just have a complete package, so we can go to the next one. There's one piece I want to put stomp on the second part of the history, though, which is I was honored to be part of the RFP process that resulted in the city hiring Ratio to be the architect. And I just want to remind everyone that, at least from my perspective, this was an incredible process again, where the RFP was let and there were 7 really qualified firms who replied, firms that had lots of experience with historic preservation, with libraries, and even with Carnegie libraries. And so the review process was really rigorous and resulted in Ratio being hired by a contract being signed in April of 2021. Next chart. And now I turn it over to Eric, who actually really needs no introduction. You've heard him before.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out that we are a firm that has done many public libraries and many historic projects, but just core to all of these projects is a community-focused design where we truly do want the architecture to be responsive of its users and of its place. So with that, I'll get into the architectural narrative and kind of skip some of these slides. Just to start out, I wanted to kind of give us a placement of where this site is. I'm sure many of you know very clearly where it is, but it's on the corner of Manitou Avenue and Pawnee. And all I wanted to point out really is, I'm sure you all have these very iconic views of the Carnegie Library kind of stuck in your head. And it's no coincidence that this park and structure is just at this significant bend of Manitou Avenue. It's a very intentional move from our perspective for the planning of this. It's where vehicles and pedestrians are purposely slowing down and paying attention to the surroundings as they're transitioning down this road. And it's that purposeful point that is really centering the library and creating this view that, again, I think you all probably have in the back of your head. The site is full of mature trees, and the existing structure is on the south side of it. We'll talk through the architectural narrative throughout the slides and the rest of the presentation. And building on what Mary was talking about previously, the community feedback has been core to the project. We started out with 3 very different design ideas and talked with the community to get a much better sense of things that they did and did not like. Again, the 3 different design ideas were intended to spark conversation that would help discover the common thread throughout the community that would lead to the final design solution. And through that, as you've heard before, is that this project has to feel like Manitou. The existing Carnegie has to be the prominent structure on the site. The architectural style just needs to complement the Carnegie and not be different. We need to save as much of this wonderful park space as we can. And the idea of having accessible park space on the roof would be ideal. And the addition should not feel monumental or overpowering to the existing structure. And to definitely explore the idea for the addition to be moved to the south side of the existing structure to further get it out of the view from Manitou Avenue. We've since updated the design and reacted to the community feedback, and the final design is what you're going to be seeing throughout this presentation today. In terms of the HPC feedback, very common threads as the community is that this is a very special site, with the existing structure being key to the park space. The existing structure has to be submissive to the addition has to be submissive to the existing structure. We need to minimize the opportunities for the addition to hide character defining elements. And another important thing to know is that the addition is not intended to replicate the existing structure, but to complement. And we also receive pair feedback. Really critical to them is making sure we preserved as much of the park space as possible, and we wanted to minimize the impact that the addition would have on the surrounding context. And again, exploring the opportunity for the addition to sit further south on the site. And just as with the community feedback, we've taken the HPC feedback and the pair feedback and distilled that down into the final design option, which has been presented to both HPC and PARAB, and we've received approval on the concept design phase. So to get into some of the design elements for this project, here you have the existing site, and just to orient everyone, the blue is the existing Carnegie Library, the orange is the new 2-story addition, and then this area is the 1-story addition that's built into the mountainside with a rooftop garden on top. And the site strategy is trying to maximize the amount of park space that is to remain on the site and minimizing the addition's effect. And what this ultimately looks like is for the new addition to be 450 square feet of park space being removed, instead of having 1,600 or more square feet being removed like previously. The main entry to the site is still coming through the southeast, where the current main entry point is. And here we've provided one accessible parking space to make sure that this building achieves its accessibility requirement. That one parking space is something that has been discussed with the city and something that is determined by the city. And we also have provided flexibility in design if the conversation were to be to adding parking spots, that we do have some flexibility. Getting into the floor plans of the design, we have kind of mocked up how the library could function. However, I just want to note that the final floor plans for this project are still to be determined as we work through with PPLD as well as with the HPC. But the intent is that the existing structure is going to remain primarily untouched, if not just restored, with the existing stack space being transitioned into a community space or a community room. The new stair and elevator, critical to providing accessibility to the first and lower level, is that 450 square foot addition on the south side of the building. And on the left of the image is that rooftop garden, where the intent is that the park space can just seamlessly flow from the park onto the building, making sure that the addition area is not taking away that beloved park space. And the actual functionality of what occurs on that rooftop deck is still to be programmed more specifically as we enter the next phase of the design. When you go down to the lower level, through the stair and elevator, you enter into the more open collections area of the library space. And utilizing 21st century library principles, we're able to utilize the library stacks to create spaces within the zone and make sure that we have maximum flexibility for the library to shift with their potential ever-changing needs. And within that collections area can also be the young adult zone. And within the lower level of the existing library, we plan on maintaining the children's area with the intent of it being able to house or host a class of up to 25 students. Another critical aspect of this project is providing PPLD with the admin area that they so critically need. The administration area, sorry. Absolutely.
All right, Julie. Councilor Wolf, please.
What are the two, can you go back? What are these things?
Yeah, those two shapes are existing planter beds on the Carnegie Library. So they're there currently, and we just have no plans on removing them.
Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the enlarged images that are just these same images. So really key to all of the feedback we've heard, going back to that initial site explanation of how this library sits on top of this park site and has a very prominent view from Manitou Avenue. Really important to this project is making sure that the addition is subservient to the primary Carnegie Library structure. The way that was accomplished was by letting it remain a one-story structure and pushing it as far back from the primary north elevation as we could. Here's a view from Manitou Avenue, just showing you what those design moves based on the community and HPC feedback, how that results in a design that does try to celebrate the existing structure as much as possible. Here's a view that more clearly shows what the addition would look like. You can begin to see how that structure is dug into the earth, with this north elevation being the only elevation of the addition that's visible from Manitou Avenue. And then the two-story addition tucked away on the south side of the elevation, hidden from Manitou Avenue, takes on an architectural style that is more complementary to the existing structure than what many of you probably remember seeing in a previous presentation. Coming on the east side of the structure is the main entry and the accessible parking space. Again, we've continued the roof line and architectural style onto the two-story addition with the hopes that the addition is not taking away any attention from the existing structure and is trying to blend in more seamlessly. And then the moment where the park space begins to spill onto that one-story addition's rooftop, creating this accessible moment that is not currently available on the site, opens up many programmatic opportunities for both the library and the community during and after library use. This could end up being an outdoor reading room. It could have garden beds on top of it. It could be a place for music performances. It's a very flexible outdoor space that can ideally be used all year round here. And appreciating how important this park is and the beautiful mature trees on the site, the design has really attempted to minimize the amount of trees needing to be removed as much as possible. There was an arborist who came and did a report of the trees on the site, and the two that are being proposed to be removed for this addition have been identified as being diseased and nearing end of life. And so there's, these are trees that, their removal is probably going to be inevitable in the next few years. And we do have an opportunity with this project to take those trees down and then turn them into something special for the project. And what that specifically is would be discussed as the project gets more into the details of the design. And it's important to note that we are going to be adding trees in place of these being removed for future generations. And then lastly, just a quick comparison of where this project started out with the previous Thorpe design. It was a two-story addition located on the east side of the project. It was about 3,250 square feet, which if you take one story of that is about 1,600 square feet being removed from the park. And through the wonderful community feedback process, the design has been led down a pathway that has reduced the building area to 2,950 square feet. As we worked with PPLD to verify how much of this project that we can reduce as much as possible. In addition, as I mentioned before, that the park space is only being reduced by 450 square feet, and that's specifically because of the need to add an elevator and a stair to provide accessibility from the first floor to the second floor. All other library addition area has been built into the mountainside with a accessible green roof on top of it for the park space to spill onto and for the community to enjoy. And I guess one final comparison is just to understand what the impact is of going from a two-story addition where the community was reacting that it felt too monumental down to a one-story addition where, again, we're trying to truly minimize the impact of this addition on the views from Manitou Avenue for the community. And then I won't spend time going through any of the engineering narratives unless a question were to be given regarding it. And I guess my final statement is that we also have provided an estimate for this project, and the estimate for this scope of work that you've seen is $3.4 million.
Great, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Mr. Doherty, did you have comments?
Nothing really prepared, but I do want to say that this design is wonderful in terms of the PPLD resources that we'll bring to it and management of the facility. I think it responds well to the community needs and what PPLD will be able to bring to it. And I really appreciate the work that Eric's done and being responsive to community feedback.
And one last comment is that I want to point out that if given approval to move on to the next phase, that we're still going to be going in to the HPC for the final design approval, and we're also still going to be going into PARA for the final design approval. The approvals that they've given thus far are for the general concept design.
Great, thank you. Councilor Wolf?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Doherty, I understand the library wasn't paying very much money before to rent this building, but if we put in $3.5 million, how much would the library be able to pay for rent every year? Do you have any idea at all before we decide if we're going to undertake this expense?
Yeah, I can't specifically say here. That would be for our Board of Trustees to approve. John Spears, the executive CEO of the library, is here. I don't know if he has comment.
Because it seems like
About
it
that
would
in
have
particular.
some relevance, at least to me, when I make a decision. It's like when I buy a house. If you're going to buy a house and you're going to rent it out, you want to know how much rent will you get. I mean, I realize this is also for the benefit of the community, and it's not to make money or even to necessarily break even, but financially, I think it would be helpful to have some idea of what the library is prepared to pay.
So we're definitely open, oh, sorry, John
Sorry,
Spears.
John, if your name, address, and
Yep,
title, please.
John Spears, 321 Santa Fe Place, Manitou Springs. We actually we'd had a meeting scheduled to have that discussion before we got to this point. But I don't remember exactly what happened. Something had come up, and so the meeting was converted to a different purpose. That is definitely a conversation that we want to have with the city because we have the same concerns that you do. It has to be a price that is agreeable to both parties. So as
How
far
are we supposed to decide this tonight if you haven't decided that yet?
Sure. So tonight's decision is whether to go forward to the next step of the design, not whether to proceed with construction. So the idea was once the council, with the advice we've gotten from the project manager, the acting project manager, was we need to get to the step of getting approval from the council on the design before entering into negotiations on the details of who pays what between PPLD and the city and what kind of rent could be negotiated from PPLD.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think that this is definitely a cart and a horse thing. And I can tell you that from our perspective, we're not exactly prepared to say how much we're going to pay for a building if we don't know what the building is. So, you know, I think that now that we're at this stage where we have a square footage, where we know basically what the building is going to be, I think that now would be a wonderful time for us to have a conversation with the city about what the library district would be paying, because I think that will also go into the funding discussion that you have over that, given that the rent could be incorporated into whatever types of repayment you're looking at.
Oh, and I don't know if this is a question for Mary, but so if this does get approved tonight, then what additional money is going to be spent by you next toward this endeavor, if any?
For clarification, spent by whom? Are you talking about the task force or by the city?
Both.
So the task force, the city has contracted with a capital campaign consultant, and we are working together with them and the city to come up with a financial plan, and that will be presented in January. On January 11th, work session is when it's planned.
So we already hired a consultant for that?
We have.
How much did we pay for that?
Do you remember?
We don't get told these things, so I have to ask you.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was 30,000.
30,000, I think, is the, and yeah, it came out of the Jane's bequest.
So if this gets approved, then that money would be spent toward helping you with your
That money
fundraising efforts?
is already under contract, and we are ongoing on that. And the campaign plan is being developed, and the results of that will be presented on the January 11th work session. Ratio Architects is already under contract to do the second phase, which is this next phase of the final plans, as well as coming up with the shovel-ready construction drawings. So this is to get approval to go to that second phase.
Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed several people, thank you, Mr. Spears. I noticed several people came in and picked up forms so that they could speak. I imagine it's to the library here. So I guess I would suggest council that maybe we let the members of the audience who want to speak to the library issue, give them a chance to speak. They may be raising some questions, and then we can bring back our three folks here, and they could respond. So would that be agreeable to everyone? Okay. In that case, if you three can find seats out there again and take notes, because you may have some questions to answer. City Clerk, do you have individuals to want to talk to this?
I do. So far, I have 4. Our first one is Jean Garrity.
Okay, Jean, would you come forward? And so what the protocol will follow is when you come up, please give your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If someone has spoken before you and they've already mentioned your topic, we'd ask you to kind of not repeat yourself. After each person speaks, I will ask for a show of hands to see how many people are in sympathy with that. So if we don't necessarily have to repeat to show the strength of our opinions here. Jean?
My name is Jean Garrity. I live at 202 Canyon Avenue. My great-grandfather, Henry McDonough Ogilvy, was the town doctor, and he also wrote the grant for the original Carnegie Library. And I think he would be very proud of how the building has served our community for the last 100 and some years. And although he's an old school doctor, he was, I guess we'd call him now an early adapter of technology. He had the first, according to family lore, the first automobile in Manitou. And I think he would be the first he's happy the library served its purpose, but he would be the first to say that it's time to add on, improve, and use some new technologies. And as is most important to all of us, to make sure it's accessible to absolutely everyone. Blending, I forgot my glasses here, so I apologize. Blending old and familiar with new and exciting requires integrating traditional architecture and uses with innovative new spaces and technologies, which is very challenging. The library task force has worked very hard and has made huge strides towards, as we've seen here tonight, to modeling the library to meet those needs. I think one of my concerns is when I look at the Penrose Main Library and I see that there has effectively been a divorce between the original structure and the new structure, and I think we've avoided that happening here, but I want to make sure that we do everything to enhance the experience for everyone so you get a mix of the old with the new. And I know that the plans are to use the main upstairs space as a community meeting room, which I think is admirable, but I would like to see it used a lot as flex space where it retains a lot of its library features as a reading room that can be used and loved as it has been for 100 years. I've looked up a lot of different libraries and additions as I've been thinking about this, and I found a library in Pittsburgh, which is like us, it's a city of hills.
Jean, you've got 30 seconds, please.
Okay. And the gentleman who was the assistant director of neighborhood libraries stated when they completed their new renovation of their 1900 library in 2021, stated a lot of respect was paid to the original Carnegie built location and the architecture. Folks will still see the front desk they know and love. They will see the phone booth and the woodwork. The addition is now new, fresh in its own way. It's a great mix of the two. And I would just like to build on what the task force has done and make sure that we find that blend of old and new, and we all continue to enjoy what we have had and what we will have.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Now I'll ask members of the audience to show of hands if you're aligned with Jean's comments. Okay, that gives us a good sense. Thank you. Okay, who's next?
Our next is Tina Reisterer.
Hello. My name is Tina Reister. I live at 806 Midland Avenue. So I want to say thank you to the task force for all the work they've done. I feel we all want the most beautiful ADA compliant expansion that honors and respects the original Carnegie Library. To me, this proposed design is better than the first three, but it's not there yet. I don't think we should rush through this and settle for anything less than amazing. These Zoom meetings tough. I haven't been able to give input in the Zoom meetings. I mean, it's been really hard for our community to be engaged in this. I want to tell you, over 30 years ago when our kids were little, I remember going into the elementary school atrium for the first time. Ken and I, we were floored. We both thought it was so wonderful. You could see the original Manitou school on the inside of the new building. The entrance to the auditorium is so beautiful. It made me think of all the people over all the years roaming the halls and sitting in the auditorium. We both really appreciated the thoughtful way the old and the new buildings were combined. It is very clear what is old and what is new. In reference to the Secretary of Interior standards, designing new additions in a manner that makes clear what is historic and what is new. I feel the proposed addition on the south tries to look too much like the original building. The roof tries to be the same as the original tile roof. There's no, I have a hard time with this word, differentiation. Also, it hides the original structure. You can't see into, to see the beautiful building. The standard again, new design should always be clearly differentiated so that the addition does not appear to be part of the historic resource. We can do better.
Tina, you've got about 20 seconds.
Okay. If you look on the internet, you can see so many amazing expansions of historical buildings that follow these standards. Can you imagine seeing the beautiful historic library while being in the new expansion? Can you imagine seeing the beautiful historic building from the outside of the new expansion? We're a creative community in Manitou Springs. We can use our imaginations and come up with a better design. We can have something amazing.
Great. Thank you, Tina.
Okay, our next is Mary Kelly.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Mary, hang on, I forgot something. Unfortunately, Councilor Chandler reminded me. I was looking for a show of hands for people who are aligned with Tina's comments. The comments were just made. Show of hands. Okay. Right, thank you.
My name is Mary Kelly. I live at 35 Grant Avenue. Many of you knew my husband, former Mayor and City Councilman Mark Moreland, who served here from 1997 until 2007. Mark and I were married for 28 years. For the first half of those 28 years, Mark was a neurotypical, healthy, mobile, able-bodied man. For the second half of our 28 years of marriage, Mark began to show signs of a degenerative disorder that would limit his ability to move about in the world. We built our house at 35 Grant Avenue in 1997. At that time, there was no sign of the disease that would come. Our house is on a hill overlooking Manitou Springs. There are 17 stairs from street level to get to the main level of our house. Our house has a total of 42 stairs among the 3 levels. The challenge of all those stairs became overwhelming for Mark approximately 5 years before he died in 2020. I championed the goal of the Library Task Force to make the Manitou Springs Carnegie Library accessible to all. No one should be kept out of the library due to accessibility, as Mark was prevented from enjoying our house. I applaud the task force for their work in this regard. The other aspects of the library improvement plan are not as clear-cut. Is it necessary to enclose the south facade and lose the historic south-facing windows? Or could an elevator be placed on the east side and thereby also retain the original entrance, which takes you into that beautiful, beautiful 100-year-old reading room? Recently, I joined a tour of Hiawatha Gardens, and I attended a lecture by Deborah Harrison about the historic use that Hiawatha Gardens served as a music venue. Can we hold similar tours of the library and identify what can be retained, including the library's beautiful park setting that Eric has mentioned? We need to have public engagement regarding the expansion of the library that is not limited to those willing to participate on Zoom. I am 100% in favor of making the library ADA accessible.
Mary, 30 seconds.
Mark would have wanted me to support these efforts, and I am enthusiastic about supporting them. I would also like to retain as much of the historic structure with its enduring patina of use by generations of Manitou residents. More refinement of the library renovation is in order before final approval can be given today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. And again, a show of hands, please. Thank you.
Okay, and my fourth one here is Teresa Kudzik.
Teresa Kludzik, 809 Midland Avenue.
Teresa, could you put your mask on, please?
Oh, sure.
And just get close, get within about 3 inches of the microphone. I think you'll
Okay.
be okay.
Okay. You got my address? Good evening, council and mayor, and thank you. Thank you, Eric, for the amazing work that you've done modifying your plans to design us a library. I just want to bring to your attention the fact that as representatives of this community, you have only allowed us to have one meeting in which we could learn about this new design. And that meeting was held via electronics, and it was a slightly different format than the meetings before that. And I was prepared to give feedback in the chat box, but this meeting you had to put in codes, and I think you required a cell phone and various other things which I didn't have available. But in the meeting, in 20 eloquent minutes, Eric did a beautiful overview of what the new design was, and the balance of that hour was spent eliciting feedback from people. And my understanding was that based on that feedback, there would be further modification of the design, and that we would then again have a chance to look at it. And if you notice, the comments that were recorded here are very generalized. They're not specific, like the ones you heard today about the roof and the placement of the elevator and what the interior would feel like. And so I was anticipating that we'd have another opportunity to give feedback about that. And I don't think it would cause any harm to invite the public to come to this space and be here physically and have a genuine dialogue. There was never any question-answer sort of experience or dialogue where people could brainstorm and ask questions about what was happening. I think that if we did this, it might be very advantageous for getting a broader community buy-in and maybe help with the promotion of the new library and however expensive it's going to be for us.
Terry?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Thank you. And again, a show of hands in the audience, please. All righty, thank you. I guess we have one more comment in the back. Linda? Bring your comments forward to the city clerk, please. It's okay. Linda, are you gonna? Judy, who do we have to speak? Linda, did you want to speak? Okay, great. Okay.
Good evening, Council and Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. I hope, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. I appreciate all the comments.
Marcy, for the record, we need you to introduce yourself. I know it seems foolish to do that, but.
I'm Marcy Morrison, and I live at 302 Sutherland Place.
Thank you.
And have been around for a long time. And first, I would like to comment, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just for a second, for all of you to appreciate Mary Kelly's comments in sense of her husband, because he served on my council for a number of years, and he was a wonderful addition to our council. And thank you, Mary. He was a great guy. That's all I can say. But to get back to our library project, I've been working not totally with, not from the very beginning, with the group that has been really spending most of their time working on this project, and with the project with the architects, etc. But I would like to say that I think that we've come to you well prepared and really well informed about how most of the community thinks about this particular project. And will we ever get to the point where we have the perfect design? And will we ever get I can't, how many of you can go and look at something and decide to purchase something and do you want to buy this now? Do you want to buy it later? Do you want it to have a different color? Do you want a different fabric? Whatever. I just want to say to you, I think this library task force has done an excellent job of working through as many of the issues that were raised in the beginning. They have really come about and solved a number of them. So they were listening to the community. Will you answer every question and every comment and get a positive response? And I don't think you will. So I'm just saying that we have now been without a functioning library, and excuse me, Natalie, for saying that, but we have not had the library in use for, what is it now, 2 years? 3 years? 2 years. I think it's 2 years. And what troubles me is that the longer we hesitate to move forward, we are losing some of our young people, and people like myself, by the way, who really need the ADA expansion.
Marcy, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, and I would like to say, let us move forward on this. There is yet, I think Eric pointed out, there are going to be design changes still. But I do think that most of the challenges that were presented to the Library Task Force have been addressed, and I hope you won't forget that, because we could have gone on for another couple of years trying to respond to everybody's concern, because there were opportunities, and they weren't perfect because of the pandemic. But certainly the committee has tried to do the very best they could to address them. And I hope that you all appreciate that because of the hours that have been spent. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marcy. And a show of hands in the audience? Very good, thank you. Linda?
Linda Moreland, 37 Minnehaha, Manitou Springs. I really can't say a whole lot more than what Marcy just said. I believe she spoke to the issue very well. The only thing I have to say is that I've lived in this town since 1978. My children grew up here, spent their time in the library weekly, both of them, for many years. My grandchildren also spent many hours in the library. I'm sorry, I'm emotional. It's very hard for me to understand why anyone would want to try and postpone or drag this on any longer. We need to protect our library. We don't have another 20 years. We need to do it now. I didn't say I'm part of the task force. I don't think that's important. Part of the community. And I think picking apart the designs, to some extent is important. I believe we've come up with several good designs. Things can still be changed, but it's time to do something. It's time to act. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. And a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. I think we've listened to everybody who wanted to speak. I'll make a last call. Anybody want to speak to this in the audience? Okay. If not, council, we could bring the panel back. If you want to ask questions, I'd like to get a sense of council what you'd like to do next. You want the panel back? Yeah, Natalie?
I move to approve resolution number 1521, a resolution to approve the design for the historical Carnegie Library building expansion located at 701 Manitou Avenue, Manitou Springs, Colorado.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Mr. Bremner. Do we want to have further discussion? Do we want to question the panel? I don't see an interest in that.
I was hoping to hear city council comments before a motion.
Okay, well, council can certainly deliberate. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, thank you. My comment is that I agree with many of the speakers tonight, with regret to the folks who would like to delay it a bit longer. I really don't think that's necessary. I think Mary's comment, Mary Pulvermacher's comment, that the process worked quite well for the majority of people. Nothing's ever perfect. I'm so impressed with the architect taking so many, taking the suggestion, boiling them down, and really coming up with a design that I think meets most people's requirements. So I'm a strong supporter of accepting this as the concept that we move on to the construction drawings with.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Shada?
Could we have the architect come back up?
Certainly. Eric, please.
I was reviewing the HPC meeting, and what did you think about the staff and what HPC approved, which was that the traditional entrance would continue to be used in some way? What were your thoughts about that?
I think it'd be fantastic. That entry stair is something that, we'd really like to celebrate. And, just kind of going to some of the other comments, is the final design is not done for this project. This is for the concept approval, which from a high level is the idea of a one-story dug-in addition with a two-story stair and elevator piece attached to it. looking at ways that we can still celebrate what that existing library space becomes is something that we're very interested in doing, and we want to keep working with the HPC, PARB, and the community to do so.
I have another question. It's just sort of kind of a bird's eye view observation of the footprint of the building. It seems like the new southern addition actually tries to kind of mimic, in a roof form anyway, the huge the footprint of the front part of the building with big dramatic overhangs and things like that. Could you comment on that aspect of the design?
Definitely. The larger overhangs, you're correct that the roof looks similar in size to the existing structure, yet the addition's interior square footage is far less. And that is, as you correctly pointed out, due to the large roof overhangs that are surrounding that addition currently. And the thought process behind those overhangs is that it's creating covered outdoor accessible park space that allows users to kind of flow out from the library and have shelter. It provides a covered entrance or covered main entrance into the new library. However, that roof form and the size of those overhangs are elements that are trying to be complementary to the existing structure in materiality, but they differ in that the existing structure does not have such large overhangs on it. So kind of going back to, there are similarities between the new and the old, and there are things when you start to get into the details that really start to differentiate the two-story part of the addition from the existing structure. And I think finally, those overhangs are part of the conversation that we're looking forward to have with the HPC. We haven't gotten into the details of materiality and the architectural details with them yet. But those are going to be critical elements that are going to really help that conversation of celebrating the old and differentiating and complementing with the new.
So could you, because it was talked about earlier that you've been retained for the next phase, can you kind of tell the public and the council what you anticipate the next step to the next phase might be?
So the idea is that approval tonight would mean that the concept design can move forward into the next phase, which is the final design. And what that looks like is a 3-phase process. There's the schematic design phase, the design development phase, and the construction document phase. We're contracted to stop at the construction document phase, but if the project were to move forward for construction, it would have to be submitted for permit still, and then a general contractor selection process would unfold. And so thus far, we've shown 3D renderings of what this building could look like, but the reality is that the conceptual design is really focusing on, from a high level, the idea, again, of a 1-story addition that's dug into the mountainside with accessible rooftop park space, and a 2-story stair and elevator addition that's providing accessibility to the existing Carnegie Library. All the other exterior elevations and roof elements are things that we've included to aid in the visualization of what this project could become, but all of that is part of the conversation that we look forward to having with the HPC, PARB, and the community to figure out what the final design is going to need to look like.
I was listening in on the night of the HPC meeting, and there was like a 45-minute kind of Zoom thing. Could you tell what the future might be in terms of, because I think we've heard quite a bit tonight in terms of people's, they kind of feel like they're kind of cut off with this kind of Zoom and all this electronic kind of calling in and stuff like that. Can we have a little bit different phase the next time that's a little more present and engaged instead of people depending upon all this technology?
In general, my preference is to always have these design meetings in person and collaborate together and really be able to experience the conversation. I'm sure as all of you have had confrontational conversations over a video chat over the past COVID time. There's a lot of body language that goes into mediating a conversation that has two viewpoints. And by doing that in person, you're much more easily able to find common ground and understand and rally around the idea that we still all want the same thing, which is, a Carnegie library that's really celebrated and to be able to provide accessibility to the community. So I think maybe that rambling is just saying, yes, I would really like to pursue these in person, but I think that final decision is not up to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Chandler?
Just to reiterate, so this next phase will also have a community engagement piece to it. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, correct.
Because I also tried to zoom into the HPC meeting and I was not able to get in, and I know that I wasn't the only person that had difficulty. So I'd like to start by applauding you. Just a fantastic job to the task force, the volunteers, you as the designer, Ratio. I think you did an amazing job. And I do think that we are 98% there. I mean, I really love the fact that you've backed off the one story. I know there's people that want it bigger, there's people that still want it smaller, but with the rooftop garden, I also, and I do think we're 98% there, and I think it's fantastic, but I also think we can get to awesome. And for a price tag of $3.4 million, I would like it to get to awesome. And what I'm hearing from the community members is it's really not going to take a whole lot to get there. I mean, there's a few design ideas I think that could very well be incorporated, perhaps maybe some more glass on the back and having more visual of the existing south side of the building. So I'm okay voting to proceed if that's the general feeling, that there's still time to have some input on those possible changes to make it awesome.
Just to confirm that the ideas of exposing that south existing structure with, to leave it uncovered, enclosed but visible from the outside, that's exactly the kind of conversations that we need to continue to have, and something that we've talked about with HPC. And when we talk about the final design, in terms of what the exterior of the building is really going to become, that's going to be a really important thing to bring up. So all that is still on the table to be decided.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Council, more comments? Okay, well, we have a motion and a second. The motion being to approve resolution number 1521, a resolution to approve the design for the historical Carnegie Library building expansion located at 701 Manitou Avenue. Do we have any further discussion? Good. Councilor Wolf, then we'll get to you, John.
I just wanted to say, I appreciate all the Zoom meetings and everything, but I've also heard a lot about people being unable to participate. So I don't know if you had 12 Zoom meetings or 150 Zoom meetings, but I do know that there are more than the 3 people in the building today who were unable to participate in the community engagement. And so that's my concern, is that before we start searching for $3.5 million, I don't think it's going to kill us if we wait 2 or 3 or however many weeks it takes to finish the community engagement so that people can actually participate and so there can be further discussion. I'm afraid if it gets approved tonight and then we're just assured, oh, there'll be more community engagement later, I don't trust that. So that's my concern, is that I'd like a little more of that before we go forward.
Thank you, Councilor Wolf. Councilor Shada?
I guess I just want to make sure that this is a conceptual design, what we're approving. Is that not correct?
That's my understanding.
All right.
That is correct.
Yes, I'd like to I suggest that the motion that we're approving tonight include that term, that we're approving the conceptual design.
I'm comfortable with that change. So it would read a resolution to approve conceptual, or to approve the conceptual design.
Let's see, Mayor Protem, I believe you made the initial motion. So thanks, Steve, the second, wasn't he? And then, sorry, Natalie. Okay, you're on board with that, Natalie? And Steve, you're good with it? Okay, so we would, basically that is then to specify that this is the conceptual design. So I guess then the motion is then to approve resolution number 1521, a resolution to approve the conceptual design of the historical Carnegie Library building expansion. Is that council's intent? Okay, Denise, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One is the amount of money that is being asked for, that's not being asked for from the city. As they've mentioned, they do have a fundraising campaign, and that what is Kimberly got is under contract. And Kimberly has been here to council a couple of times, or at least one time that presented that and talked about the campaign. So this is not necessarily city money. There will be a capital campaign, and that will be coming back in January for your review and to look at it and to talk about how they will raise the money and what that looks like. The other thing is if this is over 30%, it will have to also go through the planning process, which will have to go through the Planning Commission and to council. So there are several steps along the way. The HPC has chosen to do all meetings via Zoom and are still doing Zoom at this point. The Planning Commission, starting in December, will be in person from this point forward until further notice. So I just wanted to talk about, one, this is a fundraising. It is not city money at this point. It's fundraising. They may come and ask the city for some money. Two, it does still have to go through, if it's over 30%, go through the entire process of Planning Commission and City Council for approval.
If it's over 30% of what?
If the code reads 30% of the additional, so if the addition takes over 30% of what the current is, and that's per our code.
The current square footage? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion, council? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay, all in favor say aye. Okay, all opposed say nay. Okay, motion passes 6-1. Great, Eric, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll wait a couple minutes if anyone feels like leaving, or you can stay for the rest of the program. Thank you all for coming and showing up and expressing your opinions. Okay. The next item is consideration of updated Hiawatha Gardens Task Force Resolution number 1721, a resolution to retain historically significant sections to the Hiawatha Gardens building for future use as a transportation center and community hub. And we have Dole Grebnick and Ann Nichols. Oops. Okay, I guess we need a minute here for technical intervention.
Hello, Council. I can actually, Mr. Mayor, just go ahead and do a brief intro while Judy is pulling that up.
Okay, go for it.
So we're here tonight because Hiawatha, per our definition, has really kind of met some of the major goals of the original resolution that really directed the efforts to get to where we are today. So we're here tonight to kind of present a revised resolution to give the task force and really the site future direction going forward. So primarily we're here, Council, to facilitate questions, to get clarification, to just see how we could support that effort.
Council, I think we're probably reasonably familiar with this resolution from our packets, so I guess I'd open it up to questions and comments. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just noticed, Judy, that the numbers for the library resolution and the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force resolution is the same. Is that intentional?
There was originally, earlier in the week, it was like that. It did get corrected.
Okay.
Yes.
must have printed it off too
So
soon.
what was it just approved was 1521, Resolution 1521. Now we're looking at 1721.
Yeah, and I noticed in the packet that the resolution does have that 1521 number on it for
That
the,
was-
for the library, so that was correct. And I think
It
the
was
typo was just in the
identified-
agenda.
Right. Monday morning, it was identified, everything was corrected and put up on the website and everything with the
Okay.
correction.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay. Questions or comments from council? If not, I guess we could go ahead and entertain a motion. Mayor Pro Tem?
Sure. I move that we approve Resolution 1721. Is that correct, Judy? A resolution to retain historically significant sections of the Hiawatha Gardens building for future use as a transportation center and community hub.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Appears not. Okay, all in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. 6 ayes, 1 nay. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's, the next item is going to be the mobility and parking enterprise. I think that's going to take a little bit of time, so I would suggest we take a 10-minute break. Okay, so it's now about 7:20, so let's get back about 7:30 or so. Okay, if we could go ahead and take our seats, get started again. Okay, and our next item is a discussion on the Mobility and Parking Enterprise Fund. We have Becca Davis, and we have Robin, I believe Moore, is it? Okay, great. Okay, great. Becca, you've got the floor.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, so yes, tonight I'm here to make a presentation about potentialities of making a mobility and parking enterprise fund. And with me is our financial consultant, Robin Moore with Stiefel. Stiefel? Oh, good, I pronounced it right. Okay, so our purpose tonight is to look at maybe making the mobility parking fund, I mean, it's now part of the general fund, but to separate it out into an enterprise fund. And there's some good reasons why. But we're looking at the fact that the parking fund revenues are now great enough to support an enterprise fund. For 2022, they're budgeted at $1,228,740. And that is like a 42% increase over 2019's revenue, which was budgeted at $865,320. And staff is seeking council's direction on whether to bring an ordinance creating a mobility and parking enterprise fund to a future agenda or leave the mobility parking department in the general fund. This presentation will provide the benefits and drawbacks of creating a mobility and parking enterprise fund. And why isn't this moving? Okay, so I love this old postcard from like the 1950s of the stagecoach. I put a little triangle on there, and what do you see? Yes, it's a parking meter. I know tons of people think there was never paid parking before in this city, but that is not the case. Before the 1970s, Manitou Springs used to have parking meters on Manitou Ave. Then the Citadel Mall opened in 1972 in Colorado Springs, and at that time, it was felt that shopping malls were going to be the direct competition for Manitou Springs shopping. And since the shopping malls had free parking, then Manitou also needed to provide free parking. And so the parking meters were actually removed. They didn't just like cover them and say, we're not charging anything. They pulled the parking meters out to make a point that they were free, just like the shopping malls. Well, now we know the shopping malls are not the direct competition for Manitou Springs. And here's a little more history. In December 1989, the Manitou Springs Metropolitan District was formed, and they got a mill levy to buy the Wichita Motel, which personally I don't remember, but I understand there was a Wichita Motel on that location. And they leveled the Wichita Motel and developed the downtown parking lot, which is called the Wichita Parking Lot. And that was because it was named after that motel that was there. Then the city had the Cannon parking lot, and they let the Metro District use it as part of their paid parking program. And that was partially because they had to take on debt and everything, so that gave them additional revenues to pay down those bonds. Then in January 2020, the Metro District opened the Schmishny parking lot. And they named it Schmishny because of an individual who passed away, John Schmishny. And he left money to the Metro specifically because he wanted a parking lot built on the west side of town. And with that as their nest egg, they were able to do that. And then in the same year, the city terminated leasing the Cannon parking lot to the Metro District and began retaining those revenues. Then in May of 2012, the city began leasing the parking lot of the Tajin Alami restaurant for the summer months to provide additional parking because, let's face it, there's not that much parking in this city. Then in May I've already mentioned that one. Then this arrangement continued through 2015. Then in March of 2013, the city signed an agreement with the company Standard Parking Corporation to install parking meter kiosk and to manage a paid parking program for on-street parking, along with the parking lots, the Cannon, the Wichita, and the Schmishny. So that's the history of where we were. And, actually, I forgot one more, sorry. Let's go back. Then in October 2015, the city bought the Tajin Alami property with a down payment from the PPRTA funds, and then this property was renamed to Hiawatha Gardens. And that was because, you know, the building used to be a dance hall, and we've decided since then that we really want to try to keep that building. Then in July 2020, the contract with SP Plus, which was formerly Standard Parking, was terminated at mid-year and parking management was brought in-house. And then in April of this year, paid parking began in Hiawatha Gardens parking lot and in the parking surrounding Memorial Park. So now that is the history. So when is an enterprise fund utilized? An enterprise fund may be used to report any activity for which a fee is charged for external users for goods and services, and no taxes are involved. And an enterprise fund must be used under a few circumstances. That includes outstanding debt that's being backed solely by fees and charges. There's laws or regulations that require their fees and charges be set to cover cost, or there's a pricing policy that fees and charges must be set to recover cost. In this case, City Council can choose to create a mobility parking enterprise fund because fees are charged to rent the parking spots. Okay, so why would you want to do this? Well, it identifies the total service cost. This allows for transparency. And we're talking not only the operating costs, but also the capital costs. They're all pulled together into one fund, and it's not broken out into different areas of the city's budget. And this also provides useful management information, which is provided by the consolidating not only all the costs, but also the revenues. They're all put together in one fund. So this provides decision-making information regarding these user charges and fees. And also the audited financial statements will recognize the annual depreciation of the enterprise's fund's fixed assets. And I put in my memo the purpose of depreciation, so I'm going to mention that too. The purpose of depreciation is to match the expense recognition for an asset to the revenue that is generated by that asset. And the revenues and expenses both appear in the audited financials in the same reporting period, thereby giving the best view of how well an enterprise fund has performed in any given reporting period. Okay, and then another reason for utilizing a mobility and parking enterprise fund is that all the investment earnings and any operating surplus are retained in the enterprise fund rather than closed to the general fund unassigned fund balance at year end. And this ensures that these revenues are spent only on mobility parking related expenses and not on general government cost. Enterprise funds have bonding authority, and they can take out debt based on the projected revenue from their user fees. And they don't have to go to a vote of the citizens for this. I don't have this on the slide, but enterprise funds are not included in the Tabor 3% emergency reserve calculation. The reserve is required to be 3% of the city's Tabor eligible expenditures, and enterprise funds are not considered eligible. A mobility and parking enterprise fund will help with mobility and transportation issues and ensure that the shuttle continues to have a funding source in the future. And finally, council can include within the mobility and parking enterprise fund an allocation for sustainability projects to offset the pollution from cars coming into town and parking. Now, there are a couple of reasons why one might not want to create a parking enterprise fund. And a big one is that enterprise fund revenues cannot be spent on anything else other than the costs related to the enterprise. And the enterprise fund revenues must cover the cost of its services and its capital needs. In the past, payment for parking lot improvements and studies came from all sorts of different funding sources. If a mobility and parking enterprise fund is created, it will have to pay not only for the operating costs, but also all its capital needs. It can't get help from the other funds for that. But there are ways to mitigate these drawbacks. The enterprise fund can provide an interfund loan to the general fund if it's absolutely needed. The general fund would then pay back the loan within a certain number of years with minimal interest, and this can provide a source of funding for the general fund in the future if the need arises. And for the second, well, the enterprise fund should build up a reserve in order to ensure that its future operating and capital needs can be provided for, and it can take on debt and pledge future revenues to pay the debt back for any kind of large capital type activities. Now, I've included the revenues and expenditures that are currently involved with the parking department. Now, like I said, it doesn't include any of the capital stuff because that's over in the capital improvement fund. This is just really its operating expenditures. And you can see that since 2019, the parking revenues have been greater than the operating costs, and that's the vital point. The revenues have to be able to cover these costs, and they're doing that now. And that's why we hadn't considered a enterprise fund back when the paid parking program was first started. I mean, there was talk about doing that, but it was questionable about whether those costs could be covered by the revenues. So at the time, it was decided just to make it part of the general fund. So I just put this in just so you can see capital costs from the future, from the previous years. And I'll just say real quick like that there was bar trail, parking lot asphalting and striping, and that was paid from the capital improvement fund. The original kiosk system is paid from the general fund. Prospect parking lot, those improvements were paid from the transportation fund. Hiawatha Gardens, the down payment was made from the PPRTA fund. Shriver parking lot was paid from 3 separate sources: capital improvement fund, transportation fund, and the general fund. Now, in terms of the future needs of mobility and parking, a lot of that is yet to be determined, except for the known cost of the Hiawatha Gardens loan, which has, well, it's a lease purchase. It was annual payments of $62,152, and now we've included parking kiosks in the 5-year capital improvement plan. So for 2022, we're looking at obtaining 5 for approximately at $7,000 a piece. They're not cheap. And we've got that as an ongoing cost in the 5-year capital improvement plan, every year, 5 more. Because we don't want to replace them all at once. I mean, that would just be very painful. And then we have the new revenue sources of the Hiawatha Gardens, the parking lot there, and the parking spaces around Memorial Park. And I think that's one of the things that's really put us over the top in terms of now there's enough revenue to look at doing this. And now I've brought up the slide, which is the reason why Robin is here tonight. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to her. And she's here to address bonding potentialities of Mobility Parking Enterprise Fund.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Robin Moore with STIFO. We are the financial advisor to the city. So we help think about any debt-related issues that you might have. And in this case, it relates to the parking system. So I'll just go through this, but feel free to jump in and ask many questions. What we look at on behalf of the city and also on behalf of anyone who would purchase your bonds would be how much is out there, how much is the possibility of bonding for. So Becca's last slide had talked about having bond authority. When you create a parking enterprise, it does allow you, based on the revenues and expenditures that you have in the enterprise, to possibly issue debt, so to finance the capital projects that you would have for the system. So to determine how much capacity you have, how much bond capacity you have, we look at primarily a history of the revenues and the expenditures. So Becca had that up on the prior slide. And then, we think a little bit about if you're raising fees, but parking is really tricky because there's definitely an elasticity to it. So, you can raise fees, but people could also not park. I mean, but in the city here, you've had a great history of high demand, and it seems like probably not enough supply, but you're certainly providing the parking services, and you've had the history of revenue. We do typically go back and like to look at least 5 years of history. So, Becca's right, the last couple of years have looked good. 2020 was obviously a challenging year and on so many different fronts, so those revenues were off. But, if you look forward to 2022, the budget, 2022, the budget looks healthy. 2021 looks like it's going to be a pretty good year. If you back up a few years, there's some variability there. So all that said, it's always a little bit of a kind of moving target as to how much you could borrow. But assuming the projected revenues, looking back at the history, taking into account some of the covenants that investors who buy municipal bonds or loans like this would want to see, we're thinking at the most maybe $1 million to $1.5 million. But it's hard to say, and it seems like it's a little bit of ways until you would possibly borrow money. So you'll have a little more history as an enterprise to show possible investors. But the one other piece I just want to mention, if you think about capital projects and borrowing money for that, is that when we look at how much you can borrow, we want to make sure that if you borrow, so in this example, we said about $1.5 million is about $130,000 of a payment per year. And that's based on, a very sort of generous and approximate interest rate. You would need to keep on reserve another basically $65,000 or so, give or take, depending how we structure the debt. So you can't just have if you take revenues minus net operating revenues minus operating expenditures, if your debt service payment is $100, you can't just have $100 available. You need to have more just to have some cushion. So there does need to be additional operating revenue on hand, on reserve in the account for the parking enterprise, just to make sure that if we have another 2020, that there's some cushion in there so investors get their principal and interest repaid as they expect. So I think I'll pause there. I mean, the short answer is we don't see a lot of parking bonds. The revenue is, if you compare it to your water or wastewater utility, a more sort of predictable revenue source, we see a lot more of those bonds. We've done some. I worked with City of Colorado Springs for a very long time. They have a very healthy parking system. They've sold parking bonds. We see less of them than other enterprise revenue bonds, but certainly they're out there as a possibility for financing capital projects.
Good, thank you. Council, I guess it's time for questions and comments. Mr. Shade.
Yes, I noticed in your slides that you were talking about the $130,000 of about what you said that would be a payment on 1.5 million. Approximately. For how many years is that? 15 years. Okay. And then you said for $150,000, for 1.5 million, we'd have to have on a reserve at least 65,000, correct?
Approximately.
Approximately. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, Julie?
Thanks. And I hope I didn't miss this when I left the room for a second. So what kind of authority would council have over the people who run the enterprise versus how much discretion the enterprise people would have over spending their money? Is that, I assume, just completely up to whatever council decides to do? Or I would imagine there are certain, I understand that if it's an enterprise fund, you can't commingle the money and all of that, and we can loan, we can borrow against it, but we can't, just take it. I get that. It's different than the URA in that respect. But what kind of control, if any, will council have or lose if this is created versus just keeping those monies in the general fund? Can you explain that?
Well, you would have the same exact authority as you do over the water and the sewer. These are all funds that are part of the budget that the city council has ultimate authority over. So the requirements that we currently have would still be in place even for the parking enterprise fund.
So they would come to us like we do now, which means we don't get to talk about it at a work session. It would be presented at a meeting, and then we'd have a few minutes, and then we'd have to vote yes or no?
No, I think if it would be something major, then it would be brought to a work session.
Becca, one thing I think there's maybe a little confusion over what an enterprise actually is. And it's really an accounting mechanism in a lot of ways. It isn't necessarily like a separate, although it's considered to be like a separate business, it's not really a separate business with a new board like the URA. City council basically can run it like any other city fund. So it isn't like there's other individuals running the enterprise unless you wanted to set up a separate board to do that. But it's really more of an accounting mechanism to deal with your funds.
So Jeff, like for now, you know how our code, I guess, has authority for a city administrator to spend X amount of dollars without telling us how it's being spent. Is there anything like that on the enterprise fund?
It's really up to what city council wants to do. You can set parameters around how enterprise funds are managed, spent, how decisions are made. It's up to you.
And if we approve the enterprise fund, we have no control over limiting the amount of money that goes into it. Anything that's generated from parking and so forth has to go in there and get spent for parking unless we temporarily take a loan out, but we can't just use it for other stuff. Is that right?
That's generally correct.
We couldn't fix the MAT or use it to help rehab this building. If we have all that extra money, it just has to sit there unless we want to borrow it.
Generally, yeah. You set up an enterprise with certain, the expenses from an enterprise fund have to be for enterprise purposes, and so that's generally correct, yeah.
Councilor Chandler?
So I appreciate that this is the second time that you've come to us with this presentation. It's nice to see you in person this time, though, instead of via Zoom. Appreciate that. And not a lot has changed with the presentation. You've dangled a few carrots like sustainability. I have the same concerns today that I did the last time you presented. And I just really, I'll use sustainability as an example. I just don't, I mean, we can take money out of the general fund and have a sustainability fund if we want to. That's not just, associated with pollution and traffic and mobility. So a lot of the things you presented that we can do with an enterprise, we can already do with through the general fund. It's just like Jeff said, it's accounting, right? Two things. One, there might be a time when we need those funds and we wouldn't be able to access them if they were in the enterprise fund for something catastrophic that could happen. That's one of my concerns. My second concern, and you put this in a benefit, but I'm going to just mention it, that because enterprise funds have bonding authority, they can take out debt based upon the projected revenue from their user fees without going to a vote of the citizens. And I have an issue with that, especially if you're talking about bonding something. You're talking about bonding something big, right? Usually. And if I felt really confident that our parking and traffic issues, that we really took a resident-centric approach, I'd feel a little bit better about it. But I've seen and I do feel that we do cater to the parking and needs and traffic generated by our largest businesses, the COG being one of them. So those are just some of my concerns. I'm not convinced that the enterprise is just this great thing and we're going to be able to do so much more than we can already do with those funds just being in the general fund.
May I make a quick comment just to add on that? I want to say that you can always send something to a vote of the citizens if you want to for enterprise expenses. It isn't like you can't do that. I'm just saying if you wanted to have the citizen input, you could. But one of the big benefits of enterprise is that you can issue revenue bonds without the vote, which means you can do things a lot quicker. You can have more, I guess you could be a little more efficient. But you certainly could put it to a vote if you wanted to. You're not restricted from doing that. And I wanted to also just add on to my comment from Councilmember Wolf's question about extra money being in an enterprise fund. Yeah, I know enterprise funds do actually loan money to the general fund. It does happen, but it has to generally be coming back to the enterprise fund at some point. And I guess it could be a certain argument that it's not being used for enterprise purposes by loaning it to the general fund, but that does happen. And so it's kind of accepted as allowed. Put it that way. So I want to make sure I was clear on both of those. Sorry.
Mr. Shada?
So I just want to go over some of these numbers here, okay? If we left things alone, okay, we still have to set aside $45,000 for table reserve. You said that was 3%, correct? Okay. So if we went on this loan spree of 1.5 million, that's 65,000. So essentially we walk away another, we still have to have about $20,000 in addition to what we'd have on reserve with Tabor. To me, I kind of went back through this sort of with my lens as an MBA. And to me, I guess I kind of feel like that saddling ourselves to this compartmentalization of these funds, okay, I think we can set up our own accounting mechanisms, okay, to track how this goes, all right? I think that's well within our ability to create accounting mechanisms internally in which to track things. I don't think there's anything magic that comes with an enterprise fund in terms of you figuring out what you're spending money on and what you're planning money on and what's color of money you want to call it, or the buckets and the whole 9 yards. To me, when I see that within a 3-year range, we were actually running in the hole, okay, is very serious. I would say this is not a great track record, okay, in terms of what's going on. That was only 3 years ago, okay? We were 21% in the hole if we looked at this so-called fund, okay? So to me, this hits me as a little bit kind of like it's a little kind of premature. It seems like to me that if we really wanted, if we had, I know of no discussion that this council's had that we have a burning desire for 1.5 million, that we needed to go out and borrow it, you know, right away, quickly. Okay, create an enterprise, go do it, all right, and pay essentially $30,000 a year in interest, which is essentially what essentially the numbers you just gave me, correct? So I would rather us, if we don't feel like we have enough financial controls to know what's being spent in the whole 9 yards, and I can actually see that we have had this problem because I pulled the budgets all the way back to 2013, okay? And yes, it was very unclear as to what was going on with the loss of $500,000 in 2014, okay? Another loss of $300,000 in 2013. Another loss of $500,000 in 2015, okay? So it wasn't clear, if you go back and look in our budget documents from an accounting standpoint, in terms of what were the flows that were covering that. You see what I mean? And so I think we now seem to have that. When you go back in a contemporary fashion, I went back and starting in 2017, it looks like we put kind of a little better financial controls over this in terms of putting the right kind of money in the right bucket, okay? All right, so for instance, in 2017, we were roughly kind of balanced, it looked like to me, you know. It's kind of hard to kind of tell in those years because, as you know, Becca, sometimes we don't have the audit results, you know, for a year and a half. So you kind of have to kind of go back there and look at actuals and adjustments and try and figure out what matched, you know, when. So only in 2017 did it seem like we kind of came to some kind of rather accounting parity in terms of what we were accounting for. So to me, it feels like to me that I don't know why we're doing this. I don't know why this keeps reappearing, okay? I don't know what we're about ready to borrow for 1.5 million. It seems like to me we're losing flexibility, and it seems like to me when in a 3-year time period, when you're already out of whack 20% in a 3-year time period, I can kind of see why kind of bond counsel is looking at this and going, I'm not going to loan you all that much money because you guys don't have that great a track record in terms of in this particular color of money, okay? Now, I know that we can probably kind of stretch things here in terms of what we spend things on, and I've been on councils long enough to know that things sort of kind of get put in different kind of buckets in the whole 9 yards, okay? So I guess I'm also kind of a little leery about what that feature creep is in this kind of thing as well. To me, my philosophy is I think we ought to be flexible. I think if we have $1 million that we need to save for something, I think we ought to save for it. It seems like that's not an impossibility. This year's estimation in our current budget cycle is, if it's not incorrect, if we ran things according to the way we say we're going to do it, is about a $700,000, you know, benefit. To me, when I go back and look at all these negative amounts, okay, and I know we had parking revenue during those years back in 2014, it just isn't evident. You know what I mean? When you pull the budget books in terms of where those funds were and what that were, I am assuming we could go find that. It seems like to me, before we lock all this money away in this thing, I would actually like to see the general fund refunded from all the expenditures back to 2013 that we put into this enterprise, okay? All right? The general fund has invested in this parking enterprise, okay? And it seems like now that when it's running flush, I'm just really uncertain I want to encapsulate it. I don't see the big benefits at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thanks. Couple things. One is, I think that it's, when you go back to 2013 and 2014, we weren't charging fees as much as we are now. So we now have Hiawatha Gardens, we have the Manitou Avenue along Memorial Park and so on. So I think our revenues are much steadier now and much increased. So I think it's kind of not applicable necessarily to look back at 2013 and 2014. 2019, our actuals were actually, our revenues exceeded our expenditures. So we've got at least 3 years of good revenues. I see the biggest benefit of doing bonding is if we need to act quickly on something expensive, like if there is a property that becomes available that would be very attractive to us to act quickly on, as opposed to waiting to put it to the vote, which might be 2 years before we could get it on the ballot. I also see things as, not only land, but electric trolleys. I would like to see us be able to purchase those sooner rather than later, so I can see where we could use our capital or our funds that we have excess this year to purchase perhaps some of those. But I would just like to give us that flexibility now to do that, as opposed to kicking it down the road necessarily. And I guess my top reason why I support this is because I think one of the very top priorities in the city is mobility and parking. And I think it truly is an accurate statement when we say the budget reflects the priority of the city. So to me, this would truly reflect the priority of the city by making this an enterprise rather than just leaving it as part of the general fund. So that's why I support it. Thanks.
Thank you. Natalie?
I guess I also, I see it, I don't see it as locking the money away. I actually see it as protecting the general fund so that we're free to do other things in the general fund. Because I also feel like parking and mobility are going to be our #1 expense. And if we can separate that from the general fund becomes the fund that enables us to do other projects. So I kind of look at it differently, as not locking it away, but protecting the general fund. So it's kind of a different take. My question is, so if we were to establish this fund and we didn't bond on it, could we then eliminate the fund? Like, are we stuck with the fund for life unless we've bonded on it, or what does that look like? If
I was good this whole meeting until then, sorry. Yeah, you can basically terminate the fund, and the money goes back into the general fund. It just gets added to the city's overall revenues and spending for tabor purposes, but you can do that.
We can't hear you, Becca. You gotta get really close.
She's right there.
It's not working.
Testing.
Okay, I was just adding, that's much better. I was just adding to Jeff that you got to make sure that you don't have any outstanding debt. That includes loans. Lease purchases are okay because they're not considered true debt because the payment is reappropriated on an annual basis.
Thank you. I had a question. We call this mobility and transportation. I mean, to what extent would we be able to use this to take care of just streets in general? Can we pave streets with money, for instance?
I think as long as it's somehow related to the parking fees, I think that the parking fees are taken in, and I would agree that it could be used on the streets because you can't get to the parking fee spots without going through the streets.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I mean, you can sort of define the scope of what your enterprise funds expenditures can be used on, and as long as it's reasonably related to where the fees come from, I think you're okay.
Okay. Well, it seems to me like we have enterprise funds for water and sewer. We don't have one for streets, and we go to the general fund to take care of the streets, I believe, for the most part. To me, if we had this enterprise fund, this would maybe help us address streets. I think I guess my thinking, I may be echoing Councilor Johnson a little bit, is I think this would actually take some pressure off of the general fund. And in the meantime, we'd be building up a reserve in this transportation enterprise fund that we could use if we needed to borrow for the general fund. I don't see us, I can certainly be wrong, but I don't see us using this to borrow money externally for the future. I don't, that 1.1 million I think is a notional number. Where I would see borrowing the money for the enterprise fund is for the general fund if we needed for some large thing. Maybe it would be transportation related, we could use right out of that fund. Maybe we'd have a general fund need and we would be able to borrow the money from the enterprise fund. So I see that as giving us an advantage. I suspect that if we did have to go down the financing road, we would have some advantages by having that enterprise fund that we wouldn't have with the general fund. And in my mind, that's more of a safeguard, an insurance policy. I would prefer not to borrow money if we don't have to, because I don't see any point in paying interest if you can avoid it. In general, I'm intrigued by the idea. I would be, I think, supportive of the enterprise fund. Other comments? Mr. Shada?
You know, we all went on a city water tour, and I think we actually see how this business of us coloring money in certain ways, it actually hobbles our decision-making, okay? All right, I think it's an artificial distinction. I think it makes for really lazy management, okay? I think it's not, I think there are other ways from my MBA background that you can affect good management oversight in terms of how money's being expended, okay? And as an example, when we were on that tour, we saw we have a water tank in which needs to be replaced, okay? But we're hobbled because we're scurrying around looking for matching money, we're delaying expenditures, you know, talking about kicking the can down the block. We've also created this problem for our citizens in which our water rates are now so high, okay? You can't, we talk about all this sustainability and growing your own garden and local crops and all this other kind of stuff. This is all folly. You would bankrupt yourself when you run your hose, okay? Because we've created these funky little walls of money, okay, of different colors, when in reality, there are some years we should be, it is quite possible, in my opinion, we ought to be taking the 700,000 of the parking of this money, okay, because it isn't colored that way. It isn't. It's the same color. It's the same green money, okay? All right? That we should be building, we should be buying a water tank with it, okay? If that's the right thing we should be doing, okay, is investing in our water system. If our councils before us had done all this color of money, we would not have the amazing water system we have with the dam, with the reservoir, all those kinds of things. If they had put all these things in there, okay, they didn't do all these contrivances. There were some years, I'm sure, that things were really tight, okay? And they decided to spend a significant part of the city budget, okay, putting the dam in place and doing those kinds of things, not hobbled by coloring money in terms of different ways. So this is why I am totally opposed to this. I think this is lazy management systems that if we're saying this is good management practice, I want to say emphatically it is not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
With respect to differing opinions, I would like to move to approve the city to establish a mobility parking enterprise fund.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Johnson. Any further discussion, council? Okay, if not, the motion is to approve the to approve the city to establish a mobile parking enterprise fund. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Raise your hand. So motion passes 4-3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the last business item tonight is employee handbook adoption. So Kelly, I think you're going to walk us through this. And we spent a fair amount of time on this, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So Kelly, if maybe you can just give us what you
Yep.
feel is an appropriate overview.
Good evening, everyone. I don't plan on going through it line by line like we did last meeting. We have taken and adopted all of the recommended changes by the council. There are 2 memos that were in your council packet addressing 2 of the issues, the dress code and the drug policy. And those 2 things we did not change, and that is based on the memos that are provided for you. Does anyone have any questions on those memos?
And perhaps I should ask Mr. Parker if there's anything maybe you just wonder. Jeff, when you do that, you owe chocolate.
All right, I got 4 right here, so I'll start tossing them out. Yeah, I provided council with 2 memos, one about, dress code law, and then one about permitting medical marijuana use in the workplace. So I'm happy to discuss any questions you have. I know right now we didn't make those actual changes to the code because it wasn't clear which way city council wanted to proceed. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about those two issues. Otherwise, I'm available for any questions.
Okay. Council, I guess I'd kind of like to get a flavor of what your pleasure is. We spent a fair amount of time on that. We did have, I think, pretty complete packets and the 2 additional memos. If council wants a detailed discussion, I guess we could go that route. It may be just appropriate to go around the table and see how we feel about things. If there's no objection, I'll just do that, and maybe I'll start. Steve, what's your thought?
I have no thoughts on it.
No thoughts? Okay. Councilor Wolf?
I'm going to reserve my thoughts. I want to hear what other people have to say. I'd like to see if there's any discussion. Thanks.
Okay, that sounds fair. Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm prepared to approve it with the changes that were presented this evening, or in our packet. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and I think I'm good with the form that it's in the packet. I'm leery of of trying to bring in a marijuana law. I think that's pursuant to Mr. Parker's directive. It also seems like dress code, a very lenient one, would be the idea in my mind. I think what we have is a pretty good document here. It may not be perfect, but I think we could spend the rest of our lives trying to make it perfect. I think we've got something we can go with. Thank you.
I'm generally okay with it the way it is. I just had a question on page 6 of 47, 1.1.1, the purpose. In the second sentence, it says, you should read it. Why are we not requiring our employees to read it? I would like that to say, this is required reading. So my
I'm
thing
sorry,
is-
what page were you on?
So it's at the very beginning, 1.1.1, the purpose. And on my packet, it's page 6. And the second sentence is, you should read, understand, and comply with all provisions. Why wouldn't we want to say you are required to read, understand? Because, I mean, to me, it's like, well, yeah, if I'm an employee and I got this handbook and I get to this page and I go, yeah, you should read it, I might put that away somewhere and go, sometime, at some point, I'm gonna get to that, and then not. So that would be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think must is a better word than should.
Yeah, you must read it.
Lawyers hate the word should.
You got to do
so
it.
I think
And
it's a better-
so anyway,
better-
that would.
Okay, noted. I'll make that adjustment.
Okay, Natalie?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the handbook as is. I would like to potentially discuss the dress code at a future date, but it's not, doesn't feel important enough to warrant negotiation right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shada? Okay, thank you. Okay, Julie, did you have comments now?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we approve the employee handbook adoption as presented in our packet with the one amendment on page 6 as stated by Counselor Chandler
Do we have a sec-
regarding what shall versus should.
I'll second.
Seconded?
Just to clarify, I guess it's probably better to use the word must in a document. I think you must read, and shall gets a little bit confusing for some
Okay.
people, even though it's a
Mu-
legal.
I will amend my amendment to must versus shall.
And I
Thank you.
concur.
Okay, and again, seconded by Counselor Chandler. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor of adopting? Okay, all opposed? Any? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thanks, Kelly. Oh, Kelly, did you have a comment?
I just have one quick question. So with the adoption of this, this will become effective immediately?
I'm sorry, it did say December 1st in our packet, so. I'm
Yeah, I
fine.
wasn't
I'm
sure
fine.
whether we were going immediately or December 1st. I just wanted to clarify that
I'm fine
for
with
the
what was
record.
in the packet,
December 1st?
if everyone else is okay with that, yeah.
Make it so. All right.
Thank you.
Kelly, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Okay, time to receive or act on council correspondence. Do we have anything? Mayor Pro Tem? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Shada.
Yes, I got some more phone calls about the bus that keeps droning in the dark with nobody in it. Ruxton has the worst air quality, almost every night for 2 weeks, and we have a diesel bus, empty, 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 droning until 9 o'clock at night. Thank you.
Okay, and John, just off the top of my head, it seems to me like we got that, we were going to get that canceled. We would have to do some research, but it seemed to me like Manitou Springs, I think, was paying for the 6 to 8 hour in that time span. We were paying for that, and I think we managed to get out of it. But Denise, you're shaking your head.
Well, I'll have to research that because my understanding was that, yes, it wasn't supposed to run after a certain time during this time of the year. So let us research it and we'll get back with you.
Yeah, and actually, John, I thought we had a silver bullet through that. I mean, I thought it stopped running too.
Well, and it just seems like to me that instead of running an empty bus, I think we ought to have discussions. There are people who have difficulty with transportation and paying for it and things like this in this community.
Can you get it closer to your mic?
I'm
there?
sorry.
Thanks, that's cool.
So I think this is an example of something that we need to figure this thing out. There are people who have problems with transportation and mobility in our community. And to pay money just to have a driver up and down, all night long kind of thing, I think to the citizenry, it looks like we're wasting money, okay? All right? It doesn't look like we are fine-tuning this as appropriate. I think the optics of it look really bad, and I think environmentally it's really bad as well. It's needless trips. And if we're going to do this kind of thing, maybe we need to put some kind of push button up there at the Cog Railway, and you can summon the bus, and it can sit down here and have the engine turned off or something. I don't know. But it just, like I said, I got somebody sent me all week long how bad our air quality has been in Ruxton, and we've had 2 citizens who have bought these air quality monitoring things, and we are leading in this canyon the worst air quality. Thank you.
And John, just to respond to that, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I recall going down this path once before, and there's a real kind of a catch-22 that gets involved here. Part of the justification for the bus service, I mean, they get federal funding, and they're supposed to help people who have transportation problems, And there are a couple people who live up off of Ruxton have been identified as needing bus service. So that was part of Mountain Metro Mobility's justification for running the bus. And it's one of those things, even though these people don't ride the bus every day, or they're not on the schedule that we'd like to have them on, it's gotten written into the contract that we will provide service in case somebody wants to use it. That's how I recall it. But I remember it was kind of frustrating. And you tear your hair out and you say, this bus is empty, or it only has like one rider in 2 hours. And perhaps we just need to have that researched.
I don't have a silver bullet for it. I'm just commenting on it because I got a phone call on it.
No,
Thank you.
I understand.
It reads, can I just say on the website, it
Please.
reads that it's supposed to run 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So let us do some research because that's what it's supposed to be running right now. So we'll follow up with that.
Anyone else? Let's see. I guess, Julie, I think maybe you were a little quicker to the draw.
I was going to try to read it on my phone, but it's not worth it. This is over on Sandra Lane. Apparently, they're having a horrible time with the trash system. And it's very difficult because they have a lot of bears there, so they can't really just leave the trash cans out overnight when GFL doesn't show up on Tuesday. So then they have to drag the cans all the way back into the garage and then drag them all the way out again on Wednesday, hoping that maybe GFL will come back. When you try to call GFL, and I actually have had this experience myself within the last 10 days or so, you can be on hold for about 25 minutes and then they tell you our computers are down. Their computers are down at least a couple times a week, it seems like. So anyway, very frustrated, unhappy, angry about the system, want to know when the hell we're going to get a more decent system. I did ask, are you interested in paying more per month? Because we probably went with this particular company because they were the cheapest. And I was told, hell yes, we're getting too old to drag these cans in up and down that steep driveway with all the gravel. Anyway, so it's just a chronic problem. And I did get 2 calls about it this week. So, but, it's sort of an ongoing thing. So people are very unhappy, or at least some people are very unhappy. For some reason, I don't have that problem on my street, but I guess there are certain neighborhoods where they're less reliable. I guess it depends on which crew is out on the truck or something, but that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Parab met last night, and a couple of things they're looking at are doing art wraps for all the utility boxes in the parks. They did that, or they're about to do it in the URA section, so it'll be nice if they can do it in the parks as well. And they're also looking at a parkour course somewhere in Manitou. The students have come numerous times over the past few years, so more to follow on that. Match met last week, and they are going to be doing it opened, today's the 2nd, right? So the new grant cycle opened up again yesterday. It's online. People can go on and get their applications for match grants. They are going to be doing much more formal training on it this year for people who are not familiar with filling out the paperwork. And that training will be on November 17th at 10:30. That'll be in person. November 20th via Zoom at 2:30, and December 9th at 6 p.m. in person. There's also a postcard that will be going out to everyone in Manitou to just give some very brief information on Match and to encourage people to apply for grants. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's see, and I believe that, the fire department, they're going to be having a community meeting. I think it's going to be a week from Friday on the 12th at 6 p.m. here at City Hall, and that'll be discussed the community fire tower. So that'll be an opportunity to for anyone, but hopefully especially people in the neighborhood that's affected to come down and express, discuss their concerns and so forth. And I know that later on I guess it's, I think in December, we'll be getting an update on from the firemen on their operations, their SOP for dealing with the fire tower.
Oh, John, can you tell us how the community will be notified about this meeting next week? Will there be signs all around the neighborhood, or or what? Because, you know, most people don't read the city website.
Okay, that's a good point. Denise, perhaps we could get some publicity
Yeah,
on
I'll
that?
let you know. We have put it out. I know it's been on several areas, and I think it might have even been in the bulletin. I'd have to ask Alex all the places that it's been posted, but I'll make sure that I get that to all of you so you know how it's been sent out
Okay, yeah, and then
accordingly.
if any of you know, you can pass that information on to the, on to our
What night
constituents.
did you say it was?
It's Friday the 12th, so it's a week from this Friday.
Oh, Friday night?
And it's, 6 to, I guess, 8 p.m., 6 to 8 p.m. here at City Hall.
I think it would be nice, I don't know if this is asking too much, but you know the people who showed up to talk about their concerns about the training facility being in their neighborhood, and they had to sign a paper for Judy, I assume, with their name and phone number. Maybe someone should call them and let them know that that's their opportunity to give input. You know, I don't know. Or I'd be willing to make the phone calls if I have the phone numbers, but I just thought it'd be nice to let them know.
Okay, perhaps we can figure something out on that. Okay, good. Then thanks for volunteering to do that. That would be a helpful thing. If you had the numbers right, exactly. Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, let's go on to the city administrator's report. Roy?
Testing. Just to let you know, El Paso is completely done with the striping. We might tweak a few areas, signs, but otherwise it is done. We have several comments, positive comments on the mobility safety there now. So it's much better. Working on the Ruxton walkway around the blind corner. So we're going to try to still get that in. The weather's going to hamper that efforts with striping now, but we're going to see what we can do. We did add a state law crosswalk sign on Becker's. There were some issues where people coming down and not seeing that crosswalk. It is well signed, but we added one in the center, one of our state law ones. It seems to be helping, and we'll consider a push button sign if needed. And then Williams Canyon maintenance is on the website currently with all the schedule of maintenance. And again, April and November are typically the months they do the maintenance 2 times per year. But if you have questions, it's on there. But if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Denise?
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick things. I think I introduced most of you to Larry Manning tonight, who's our interim city planner. He has over 50 years of city planning experience and worked at City of Manitou in the 90s, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, I believe it was the 90s for about 8 to 9 years. So we're excited to have him on. And then we just had a very preliminary meeting about EV charging station today, just to see what that would work, how with CSU, what that would look like, how would it be funded, what would be the cost, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very preliminary, but we are looking at trying to get a fast charge electric charging station here in Manitou Springs in the next year or so.
Great, thank you. And Denise, is there a community meeting on the MAPS project?
Yep, thank you. That is on November 4th, and we've been getting that out. I think it was even in the paper. So that's this Thursday here in this room from 6 to 8, I believe also. And that is the MAPS, yes.
Okay, great. So we could pass that on to our constituents too.
Yep, thank you. Sorry about that.
Thursday. No, that's fine. I'm
Oh,
just,
6 to 7:30, sorry. Roy
6 to
has to
7:30,
correct me,
okay.
6 to 7:30, yes.
okay, anything else? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, motion by Councilman Bremner, second.
Second.
Okay, and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, great. Thank you all. Have a good evening.